Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome. You are at a demo of the basics of Tableau for users and future users of UW-Madison's institutional Tableau workbooks. This session is brought to you by Academic Planning and Institutional Research in the Office of the Provost and the Office of Data Management and Analytics Services under the Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration. The leadership for those two offices, Jocelyn Milner, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Director of Academic Planning and Institutional Research, and Jason Fishbane, Chief Data Officer and Director of Data Management and Analytics Services. Those two are the sponsors for our Enterprise Tableau project. My name is McKinney Austin. I have duties in both of those offices, and I also coordinate our institutional Tableau development environment. Can everybody hear me okay? One preliminary thing is we are videotaping this particular session, so I'm going to ask that if you have questions, you hold them till the end, and we'll have an opportunity for that. This is one of three of these presentations this week. Three demos, 3 different days, 3 different times, 3 different areas of campus, but all the same content. So you didn't miss anything if you weren't at either of those sessions on Tuesday or Wednesday, and if you were, you're not going to get anything new here today. The PowerPoint presentation that you're going to see, that slide deck, will be posted at the website of Data Management and Analytics Services, which is data.wisc.edu. Also, as I said, we are videoing today's session, and that video will also be posted at data.wisc.edu. I also want to note that most of the concepts and content that we go over here today is available in other formats. We have a quick reference document that we will see later in the presentation that covers many of these concepts in a condensed reference sort of way. We're working on producing some short video tutorials, and we also have a knowledge base site for Tableau. So all of that is to say, don't feel like you need to take notes or take any pictures of any of the content you see. Just try to enjoy it and absorb some of it, and know that when you run into any of these things, there's other ways to get the content and to get help. So I want to start with a little bit of context. We had 3 general information sessions back in January that were a similar format to this that I know many of you were at, that were about the data governance and data management program generally at UW-Madison. And there was a segment that sort of previewed Tableau and talked a little bit about the query library and the transition away from that. If you were at that, some of this will be a little bit of review, but I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So the first thing is, what is Tableau? And my 15-second definition of Tableau is that it is data visualization, analytics, and reporting software platform that has a few different components, and it's important to understand that. There's a Tableau desktop application that is used by developers to create new Tableau content. There's a Tableau server which can host that content when developers want to publish that content out. And then end users can use their web browsers to then get the Tableau content and interact with these workbooks. And that final component, the usage of the Tableau content, is the scope of what we're talking about here today. So we're not going to be talking about the development or the publication. Why are we talking about Tableau? There's a couple of reasons. One is that it is now our enterprise data visualization tool, and it's also a primary enterprise tool for business intelligence, analytics, and reporting. So it's not going away, and you'll probably see more and more usage of it in the future. The other big reason is URAP, which stands for the University of Wisconsin Reporting and Analytics Project. Some of you may know of it as the Query Library Replacement. And hopefully that's not news to anybody in this room that the query library is going to be phased out. But much of that content that you may be accessing currently in the query library is going to be delivered in the future through Tableau. So it's important for people who use data and institutional information to be able to effectively use the Tableau content in the future. So what is this demo about? It's about the nuts and bolts of how to use Tableau. We're going to be talking about the interface. We're going to be talking about how to do some basic things like printing and downloading. It's about the UW-Madison specific format and functionality because we do have governance around the publication of this Tableau content, and there are certain features that are built into the format of our workbooks that it's important to understand. And then we're also going to be talking about how to access the content and how to customize it to your own use so that you can use these things as efficiently as possible. What we're not going to be talking about is the content or substance of any particular Tableau workbooks. I'm going to be doing a live demo of 2 different Tableau workbooks. They both happen to have student data underlying them, but that's irrelevant to the demonstration. We're going to be looking at the function of Tableau, and everything we look at is going to be applicable to any of our Tableau workbooks, whether it's HR data, student data, finance, research, etc. And this is also not a comprehensive training for Tableau. We were careful about calling it a demo. I do hope that you get a lot out of it in terms of learning the basic functionality, but really the training in earnest is something that is in the planning stages and is a little bit further down the road. And let's talk a little bit about where this demo fits into the overall plan. So as I mentioned before, we had some information sessions that were more general in January. Right now we're covering a demo of basics. And we're in the planning stages of content-specific trainings, and those trainings will be about the substance of Tableau workbooks and how to use them in the context of their functional areas, like student or HR or finance. Okay, and then the final thing that I need to cover before we get into the actual demo is some terminology. And this is pretty dry stuff, but it's important to understand because I am going to be using these terms throughout the demo, and they do have specific meaning, and they're differentiated from each other. And you'll also see this in other help content around Tableau. The first term is Tableau Workbook. A Tableau Workbook is a self-contained Tableau file. It's the umbrella file that houses the Tableau content. It has at least one, but maybe more, dashboards. We have at UW-Madison 2 different categories, and we made this up, 2 different categories of Tableau workbooks. We have data visualizations, sometimes called VIZs for shorthand, and we have institutional data exporters, or IDEs. And we're going to cover each of these, and we'll do a separate demo for each of those. So a Tableau workbook contains 1 or more dashboards. A dashboard is a single page in a Tableau workbook that usually has 1 or more worksheets and usually has 1 or more interactive elements for the end user, such as filters or menu options. There's also something called a view, and a view is a dashboard, but it's a dashboard with specific settings for the filters and other interactive elements. So an example of that is if you had a dashboard with counts of students and there's a filter that allows you to select between undergrads or grads. When the filter is set at undergrads, that is a particular view of that dashboard. When that filter changes to grads, that is a different view of the same dashboard. So a dashboard usually houses one or more worksheets. A worksheet is a single display of information, such as a chart or a table or a map. Okay, so let's look at that visually, and hopefully this is helpful. This is a screen grab of some Tableau content. This whole thing is a Tableau workbook. This particular page that we're looking at is a dashboard in that workbook, and it's represented by one of the tabs at the top, the second tab. You'll notice that there are 4 other tabs that represents 4 other dashboards. So this Tableau workbook has 5 dashboards. And on this active dashboard, this line chart is a worksheet. And the tree map and the table are also worksheets. So this particular dashboard has 3 worksheets, and this particular Tableau workbook has 5 dashboards. Okay, now we're going to jump out and look at some content. So now I'm live in a Tableau workbook, one of our institutional data visualization workbooks. This one is called Trends in Student Enrollments. And I talked earlier about how we were going to go through some of the formatting elements. We're going to do that now. So when you visit a workbook for the first time, you'll usually start on a home page that looks like this. There will be a description, and it's pretty easy to ignore the description and jump right to the content, but I really hope that you will read the description at least the first time you visit, because often there is very important, really critical pieces of information in that description about the workbook. So in this example, there's a sentence here that says, enrollments in this visualization are as of the 10th day of class for each term. That's really important information if you're looking at enrollments, to know that it's a snapshot from a census date in a term. Below the description, you will see these 4 icons with a description of what the icons do. For a moment, I'm going to ignore the arrow and the house because those are navigation features, and we'll cover that in a second. But I first want to draw your attention to this question mark. This question mark is what you want to click whenever you're having difficulty with functionality of the workbook and you need help. So if I click that button, it's going to take me to a quick reference document, and this document covers a lot of what I'm going to be covering today, but in a very condensed way. So it's a nice reference and reminder of how to do certain things in Tableau, and it's about the functionality of Tableau. You will see that on every dashboard of every workbook that we produce institutionally. I then want to draw your attention to this eye icon. The eye is for information. This is something I would recommend that you look at it the first time you're at a workbook, regardless of whether you're confused about things. But whenever you get confused about or have questions about the content of a workbook versus the functionality, you'll want to click on this eye icon. And it's going to take you to some documentation about the workbook, which is going to include important notes about the content, but it's also going to contain definitions of the terminology that are used in the workbook. So we get a lot of questions about the content of our workbooks, and I would say much of the time, though not all the time, much of the time the questions we get were answered in these notes. It's just that the user didn't know that they were there or missed them. So when you do have a question about the content, that is a good starting point to look at. And then if your question's not answered there, you should contact somebody. And speaking of contacting somebody, every dashboard of every workbook that we produce institutionally also has a footer that has an office that's responsible for the Tableau workbook, and an individual and that individual's email address for questions. And you should always feel free to reach out to that person either with questions or feedback or suggestions for how to make the content better, and especially if you see anything that you suspect to be an error. That's the primary point of contact for that Tableau workbook. And finally, we have this red box that says what's inside. This is a table of contents for this workbook, and each of these listings are titles of dashboards that are in the workbook, and clicking them will navigate to the dashboard. You may have noticed that there are also tabs, and these tabs correspond to the dashboards in the table of contents. The reason to have this in both places is that when you have a significant number of dashboards in a workbook, the tabs just kind of extend off the page, and so you would miss that there were additional dashboards if you didn't see them in the table of contents. So here's a screenshot of the workbook we were just looking at. These elements that are in yellow appear on every Tableau workbook and on every dashboard in that Tableau workbook. And these items that are in yellow appear only in workbooks that have multiple dashboards. And we do have a fair number of Tableau workbooks that are a single dashboard, and so they don't have a table of contents or navigation buttons because there's nothing to navigate to. So speaking of navigation, to get to the content in this workbook, I can, of course, click on the first dashboard in the table of contents, and that's going to take me to the first piece of content. You'll notice now that the icons moved around a little bit, but they're all still there. We've got our footer with contact information. We've got our I for questions about the content. We've got our question mark for questions about functionality. And then we have these navigation buttons in the upper right. So if I click forward, I will go to the next dashboard. And this is often a good way to navigate when you're exploring a workbook for the first time, because these dashboards are usually organized in some sort of logical sequence from general to specific or something like that. So sometimes it makes sense to just sort of travel through them using these buttons. The back button will, of course, take you back. And then the little home button will always bring you back to the home page. Okay, now let's look at some content. The first thing you're going to notice when you see this is that it looks really ugly and it doesn't look particularly useful because you just have this rat's nest of lines. It's pretty hard to make any sense of it. This is not a poor design choice on the part of the developer. This makes sense when you understand how Tableau is set up, which is that underneath this workbook there is the full universe of data for this time frame, for this subject matter. But really, any individual only cares about some segment of that data, but somebody cares about, all pieces of that data are cared about by somebody. So they all need to be in there, and there has to be an original view to a dashboard. So if you'll remember, a view is a dashboard with its particular settings of filters and things. It has to have an original view. So there are three choices. You can either show everything, which we've done here, and you'll see that the filters are set to all, or you can show nothing and let users choose what they want to see, or you can choose something random that somebody will care about, but most people will not. With most of our workbooks, they're set up this way with everything showing at the beginning, because then at least when you get there, you know what you're looking at right away. You know that this is a line chart. It's showing a trend of enrollments. You can probably tell pretty quickly that each line represents a major. And then you use the interactive elements to start throwing out the stuff that you don't care about to get down to what you do care about. And you do that with these interactive elements. Most of our dashboards are set up in a landscape format. And in that case, the interactive elements are going to be on the left. These are filters. We do have some workbooks that are in portrait mode and or portrait format. And in that case, the filters may be on the left, but they may be at the top. You'll notice that there are two groupings of filters on this particular dashboard. That's trying to signal to the user that there's a logical difference between these filters. And in this case, the two filters that are at the top are global filters. The settings on these go throughout the entire workbook, and the group of filters below are filters that are specific to this dashboard. So making a change to filters down here is not going to affect the other dashboards when you navigate to them. You'll notice that these filters, they all have a title, and you can see what their current setting is without clicking the drop-down. So let's say that right now we're seeing everything. What I'm interested in is the School of Business. I see a filter that says School College of Major. I can see that it's currently set to all. I click the drop-down, and now we see all of the schools and colleges for UW-Madison, and I see business there. You'll see that there's an all button, and toggling that button will either deselect everything or select everything. So to choose business, I'm going to deselect everything and select business. With many filters, as soon as you make the click, they apply, and you'll see things change. But some filters have an apply button, and they don't do anything until you click the apply button. So keep an eye out for that, because if you think you changed a filter but then nothing seems to happen, just double check that there is an apply button and that you clicked it. So when I click apply, you see things got cleaned up considerably, because now we're limited to one school, and so we have far fewer majors. You'll also notice now, if I come down and I click on major, that we just have business majors. This is called cascading filters. So the fact that I made a selection in the school college filter affected the values that are available to me in the major filter. And that's logical when you have a structured hierarchy like school, college, department, major. You'll notice that it didn't affect any of my filters that were about student attributes, because they're not part of that hierarchy, so there was no cascading effect on them. If I want to clear this filter, I can, of course, come in and check all and apply, or individually click everything. But there is an easier way, which is there's a clear filter button. So there's this little icon next to the title of the filter that looks like a filter with a red X. If you click that, it'll clear the filter back to the setting that the filter was at for the view. So if you'll remember, in our original view, everything is set to all. When I clear that filter, it goes back to all. Okay, there's one more thing I want to show you, a feature with filters, which is a search feature. So if I'm interested in, let's say, medical physics, engineering physics, and physics departments, right? That's 3 departments. We can see that we have a ton of departments here, right? I can hunt through this list and find those 3. But you may have noticed there's a white box down below our apply and cancel button. Sometimes this white box is above all of the values. But if I click in that box and I type PHYS, in real time, the values that were available to filter on in this department filter, it limited them to ones that meet that search criterion. So now I can easily see engineering physics, medical physics, and physics. I click apply. And now for those 3 departments, we're going to have 6 majors. And there we are. You'll notice there's a legend down here. So I can see the dark blue is physics, That's the top line. And this certainly conveys some information to me, right? I can look at the trend and I can get a sense of the basic trend for enrollments in the physics major. I can see that it's generally gone up over the last couple of years and was flat before that. But I really can't tell what the actual values are by looking at this. There are no labels. For instance, for 2009, I can see that it's about 250, but I can't tell if it's 248 or 253, and I might care what the actual values are. There's a feature in Tableau called a tooltip, and if we just hover our cursor over that point, we will get a little pop-up box of additional information. In this case, our pop-up box is going to tell us this is fall 2009, this is the physics major, and the head count of students was 251. So this is something that I know a lot of people have missed as they've looked at some of these workbooks, the fact that there is this additional information if you hover your cursor. And the amount of information that's in there is really up to the developer. So in this case, it's pretty basic. It's just the information based on what we're seeing. But in some cases, you might find a lot of additional information in that box. For instance, even additional metrics. So here we could have also had a value for percentage change over the last year. So it's always a good idea to hover your cursor around. Almost any visual element in a Tableau workbook will have a tooltip, whether it's a segment in a bar on a bar chart, or a slice of pie, or a state on a map, or a point on a line, as we have here. You might also notice that there's not a lot of color differentiation on this line chart. And that's because Tableau assigned the colors to these majors at the point at which it had all majors available. So you may find sometimes that you filter down to just a couple of options and it's kind of difficult to differentiate. And it can be a problem. Looking here, we have three majors that are all sort of reddish, orangish colors, and they intersect with each other. And with some of these, I can't tell, are the lines bouncing off of each other? Are they crossing? The tooltip can help with that because when I hover over, I can see what the major is, even if I can't distinguish the color in looking at the legend. But there's also a feature called highlight. Right now I'm hovering. If I actually click, it's going to select that line, and it's going to highlight it by making the other lines fade a little bit. So this can be very helpful in differentiating between content that looks the same, or if you have a lot of content, being able to follow one line through all of the other content. When you make a selection like that, the selection itself is not affected by changes in the filters. So in this case, I was focused on these three departments. I'm looking at the physics major, and the physics major is the big dog in terms of enrollment among these six majors. But if I want to know how this compares across the whole institution, if I come back to my department filter and just clear it by clicking the clear filter icon, all the other content came back in when that filter was cleared, but I did not lose my selection. So now I have a different view of the same information and a little bit more context. I could have done that to look at the school college or in the disciplinary division of physical sciences. So that can be a valuable comparison tool. Okay, that covers some of the basic interactive elements. It is by no means comprehensive, and there's a lot you can do if you click around. But now I want to turn our attention to the menu. And the first thing to know about this, it's down here at the bottom, and it's split. There's some menu buttons on the left. There's some menu buttons on the right. This menu is not always at the bottom. It's sometimes at the top, and it depends on where you're viewing the Tableau workbook. If you're viewing it on the server, that menu appears at the top, and if you're viewing it through a link, it appears at the bottom. And this has caused some problems because if you get used to viewing these workbooks on the server and you're used to going to the top and then someone sends you a link you might think that the menu has disappeared. It's always there. It's just it might move around on you. The first button is undo. And if I click that, it undoes the last change that I made to the view. And remember, changes to the views are about filters. I had cleared the filter for those 3 departments. I had cleared that out. So by pressing undo, I went back to my filter to those 3 departments. There's a redo button, which will, of course, redo. And then there's a revert button. That revert button will reset the view to whatever view you were in before you started making any modifications. So we started this workbook in the original view. And so when we click revert, we will reset the workbook to that original view, which is not going to look any different because we had already cleared the filters. I'm going to ignore the refresh and pause buttons for now because they don't really have any application to the content that we've developed so far and aren't likely to have any application in the near future. They have to do with they're things that you can do when you have data connections that are live or near live, and we typically are connecting to data warehouses which do not refresh by the minute or by the second. So skipping over that, we have the View button. This is a really important button. We've talked a little bit about views so far, and everything has been about the original view. You are not locked in to the original view. You can customize the view and save it for future use. So if I come back to my department filter, and I search PHYS, and I select my departments. That's annoying. You've seen me do that twice now, right? It's repetitive. It was a number of steps. What I can do is save this view now. I come down here, and the button says View Original, which is letting me know that I'm still locked into my original view. When I click that View button, I get a little pop-up dialog box. It says Name this view. I'm going to name it Demo Phys. And now that I've put a name in that box, the Save button has gone active. Before I click that, I want to point out there are 2 other options here. There's a checkbox for Make it my default. If you check that, then when you return to this Tableau workbook and to this dashboard, if you have authenticated into the server, then Tableau will already know that that's the view you want to see, and that will be your initial view for you personally when you come to the workbook. I'm not going to check that right now. The other option is Make it public, and I implore you to not check that box, because what that'll do is then insert this view into everybody else's list of views. So that's not going to really cause any harm, except if everybody starts doing that, we're going to have really cluttered lists of views, and it's going to be hard for us to find our own content, which is the whole point of having these custom views. So try to remember to not make your views public. Okay, I'm going to click Save. And now that view is associated with my net ID, and whenever I authenticate and interact with this workbook, Tableau is going to remember that that's one of my views. I didn't make it my default, so if I came back to this workbook, I would be in the original view, but I can toggle between views easily by now clicking the View button, and you'll see you always have the option to go back to the original view, which is going to be the view as it was when the developer uploaded the workbook. But now you can see I have a bank of my views, which has the Demo Phys. And then I had made a couple of other views before this demo. So if I want to toggle to this other view I have, I just click on that view, and it's toggled. And you can see I had a number of filters set. I'm filtered to bachelor's level. I'm filtered to physical sciences. So that's a way you can quickly toggle between different views without having to mess around with the filters. And some of these workbooks, like this one, have a number of filters. So that can be a pretty helpful thing. And especially if your area of interest is pretty narrow, you probably want to use the custom views most of the time to quickly get to your content. Okay, the next button we see is an alert button. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I don't think there's a lot of places where we could use it right now, but potentially in the future we could. It functions like a stock alert. So basically what you can do is, based on your y-axis here, if it's a numerical field, as this one is, you can set a threshold value and get an alert when that value is exceeded. So in this case, our highest major, computer sciences, is at 1315. I could set an alert for 1350, and when this line crosses 1350, I'll get an email telling me that my alert has been tripped. Wouldn't make really any sense based on the content of this workbook because this is something that's updated once a semester. But potentially there are workbooks that are being developed where the alert might make sense. So just kind of be aware that that feature does exist. The next button we have is subscribe. And this is pretty useful, I think, for some people. You can subscribe on either a daily basis or a once-a-week basis. And what a subscription does, if I set this to a once-a-week, Monday morning subscription, you can either subscribe to the view or the workbook. If I subscribe to this view, on Monday mornings, I'm going to get an email from Tableau at wisc.edu that is going to have an image of this filter in its most of this view in its most recent updated state. So that's a way you can subscribe to content that's interesting to you, but that you don't want to have to make the effort of going out to the server and checking it from time to time. This is a way to kind of keep yourself up to date on these things and kind of keep an eye out for any significant changes. Once you see it, if you see something interesting there, if you click on the image in the email, it's then going to take you directly to the view. And again, this is view-based, not dashboard-based. So in this case, if I subscribed, I would be getting this view. If I changed my view to the demo phys view that we just created, that's the view I'd be getting. If I just changed some of these filters and did not save the view, I would not be capturing the changes in the subscription. I'd be subscribing to the view. The other thing to note about subscriptions is that you are not limited to subscribing yourself to a view. So you can use this to subscribe your boss to something you think that they should see, or people that you supervise, and they can, of course, unsubscribe themselves if they don't think it's interesting. You can manage your subscriptions with this Manage button to stop receiving those emails. Okay, the next button we have is Share. Like the Subscribe button, this is view-based. What you would be sharing would be the view. So in this case, if I switched back to the demo phys view that we just created and shared it, when someone goes to the link, they will be going to that demo phys view. If I went to demo phys and then changed the filters and didn't save it as a new view and shared it, I'd still be sharing that demo phys view. You'll see three options for sharing. One is an email link button, which is probably the quickest way to share. This will only work if you have an email client set up on your computer, which I'm sure most of us do on our work computers. We have Outlook. So if I click that button, a new draft email will just pop up with the link already in it and a subject that corresponds with this dashboard. And then I just fill in the two and click send, and that's how I can email the view. I don't do that very frequently. I usually use the second option. You'll see it says link, and then there's this little box. And if you click in the box, it will automatically highlight all of the text of the link. And then you can just copy it, Control-C in Windows, Command-C in Mac OS. And then I can paste it into any application I want. I can paste it into Outlook if I want, but also Messenger, or I can put it as a link on my website or in a Word document. So that's the way that I typically would share a view. The third option is embed code, and this is something that you would not use every day. Again, if I click in the box, it highlights all of this text, and this is actually a script that you can copy and then paste into the HTML of a website, and it will actually embed the view into the website. Not a link, but the actual view with all of its interactivity and its content. There's not a lot of use case for that, but there is some. So, for example, we can see here that computer sciences enrollment is skyrocketing. This is a public workbook. Computer sciences can embed this view in their admissions website to impress prospective students that their enrollments are skyrocketing. The caution about that is that all of the interactivity is included, so you have to know that the people who interact with it can start changing the filters and see whatever. And then the other thing is that it has to be a public workbook, because if it requires authentication, then putting it on your website, people are not going to be able to see it without authenticating. Okay, the next button is a real bear. This is the download button. And when I click download, you'll see 5 options on the screen. You'll see Tableau Workbook, PDF, Crosstab, Data, and Image. This button causes a lot of confusion, so I'm going to try to go through it, and I hope it makes sense. The first thing to know is that you will almost never see all 5 of these options as being active. And if they're not active, they're grayed out. The Tableau Workbook, for example, is almost never given as a permission, both for security reasons and because it's not very useful, because the only way to do anything with it is if you have the Tableau desktop application. So we very rarely have that as an option. Usually PDF is available as an option, and I'm going to go through that one because that's the recommended way for printing these dashboards and workbooks if you need to take a hard copy to a meeting or if you want to share it in that format. So I'll click PDF, and I get a dialog box. The first thing to pay attention to is the layout. As I said before, most of our Tableau workbooks are in a landscape format, but the default when you click PDF is going to be portrait. So you'll want to change that to landscape. We did set up our height and width of these dashboards to print pretty well. So you don't need to mess with paper or scaling. And then you have an option of what content you actually want to export to PDF. So by default, it's going to be this dashboard. And notice that does not say this view. This will be just whatever you're seeing. So if you made changes to the view, you don't have to save them as a new view in order to export it to a PDF. So if I click this dashboard, it's going to take what I'm seeing on my screen and make it a single-page PDF. The other option you might want to use is Sheets in Workbook. If I click that, you'll see down here in the Sheets to Download box that now we have a sheet for each of our dashboards, and you may or may not be able to tell they're highlighted in a very pale blue, which tells me that they are selected. You can deselect any of these, so if you just want to share 3 of the 5 dashboards, you can do that. So I might want to uncheck the home page and not print that part. I then click Generate, and the server will actually create a PDF file, and then it'll tell me that the PDF file has been generated. I can click Download, and I will download the file. Different users will have different experiences with this depending on their browsers and settings. So I'm using Chrome, and based on my settings, you can see that after I click Download, I have a file down here in the bottom left. For some people, the file may just open automatically. And for other people, it may download to a downloads folder or some other location. I hope that you know where your downloaded files go in your browser. But if I click this, it's going to open, and now I'm in a PDF viewer, and I'm looking at a PDF version, and this is the dashboard that we were looking at before. So now I can print it from my PDF viewer, and that's a good way to share it. And then this is also a way that you can save this PDF and have sort of a historical record of this view as it existed today. Okay, back to our download options. The next one is Crosstab, and this is what you want to use to export data to Excel. What this Crosstab button will do is generate a text file that's a CSV format, and that format can be opened directly in Excel. One really important thing to know about the Crosstab, which is different than most of what the other things that we've looked at, is it is worksheet-based as opposed to being view-based or dashboard-based. So oftentimes, this option will be grayed out, and there are two different reasons it could be grayed out. It could be grayed out because you don't have permission to download the data. And I would say with maybe half of our workbooks, that permission is not granted. But the other reason is because you have not selected anything to export. And this has tripped up a lot of people because there's really nothing here to indicate that you need to click in a worksheet in order to export a Crosstab. But usually you do, and especially for dashboards that have more than one workbook, you will always need to click, or more than one worksheet, you will always need to click in the worksheet. But just a simple single click anywhere in the worksheet will signal to Tableau that that is the worksheet that you're interested in that you want to export to. This is in the quick reference document, by the way, so I know it can be confusing. So now if I click Crosstab, before I click download, just a reminder, so we have all of these majors. We're already filtered down to maybe a dozen. We have our years and we have our enrollments. I click download. File pops up down here. I click it. It opens in Excel. And you'll see we have a row for each of our majors. We've got each of our years, and then we have the actual values for those majors for those years. So what I've done is I've exported the summary data, and you may want to do that to do some additional calculations on the data that you're seeing, or in order to put it in some other document or share it with somebody. Okay, you may have noticed I said Crosstab is what you want to click when you want to export data, which is counterintuitive because there is an option that says data. And so I'm going to show you why you don't want to click that in order to export data. Because when I do, this is what I get. This is the exact same information. All of the same values are here, but it's organized in a really weird, counterintuitive way. It's not tabular in the way most of us would use data. So it's usually just not very useful, and it's not providing anything that wasn't already provided in that Crosstab. So that's why I say you want to use Crosstab to export data, even though there is a data button. And then finally, there is an image button. If I click that, I will generate an image file. I click download. And now I have this PNG formatted, essentially a screenshot of the dashboard we were just looking at. Okay, that covers all of the highlights of a data visualization workbook. I said that we have two different categories of Tableau workbooks, and again, this is a UW-Madison specific construction. People from other institutions wouldn't know what you were talking about if you talked about them in this way. What we were looking at was a data visualization. It had visual elements to it. It was summary information. It was aggregated at the levels that we were filtering at. That format just doesn't get it done for the query library format, right? A lot of people use the query library in order to get row-level data for operational purposes. So the format that we have to deal with that is called the Institutional Data Exporter, IDE. What is an IDE? It's a Tableau workbook. It's still in Tableau, but its purpose is to provide tabular data, and it exports a CSV file that can be opened in Excel, just like we did with the Crosstab export. It's actually the same process. It's just going to have a different result. So how are IDEs different? I just touched on it a little bit. They are limited purpose, and they are for operational use. They reflect the data. They don't necessarily line up with official vetted stats. And this is a really important thing to understand, is that when we summarize information at an institutional level, there's a fair amount of work that goes on behind the scenes of taking the data and making choices about sorting it and what goes where and how we aggregate it. If you take the raw data yourself and start aggregating it and summarizing it, you may make different decisions than the institution made about how things get sorted and aggregated, and your numbers may or may not match. So the caveat with using the IDEs is they really are only for the purpose of operational use. So that's important to know because for many of our subject areas, we just looked at a data visualization for student enrollments by major. There will also be an IDE of student enrollments by major. So how do you know when you should use the data visualization for student enrollments by major versus the IDE? Whenever you want to do anything with trends or analysis or strategic decision making, or you want anything summarized or aggregated, even at a fine level of detail, you want to use the data visualization. That's the reliable source for those purposes. But you should use an IDE when you need specific information about specific individuals, like students or faculty and staff if you're using HR data, or transactions if you're looking at finance or research. So here's a screenshot of an IDE. This one is called Public Student Directory, and we will demo this one in just a second. There were questions about this at the other sessions, so I just want to be clear about this. This particular IDE is public student directory information, and it excludes students who have exercised a FERPA hold, and it redacts email and mail for students who exercised an email or a mail hold. Of course, for many of you in your work, you still need access to those students' information. There is also, it's not in production yet, but there is also an IDE for internal student directory information. So I just wanted to be clear about that. You should notice, as soon as we look at this IDE, that it still has some of the same format elements that we had in our data visualization, and they have the same level of importance. We still have a description, and that description still has important information. So, for instance, this description notes that students who have exercised a FERPA hold are not included. We still have a footer that has a responsible office, an individual, and an email address for that individual. And we still have our eye icon for notes and documentation about the content of the IDE, and we still have the question mark for help with some of the functional elements like downloading a crosstab. Okay, so here I am. There is no home page, there is no navigation. IDEs are very simplistic, and at least to this point, they are all a single dashboard. And you'll notice that there are no visual elements at all because the sole purpose of them is to provide tabular row-level data. They're organized in this way to be as straightforward as possible. If you follow this sequence, I think things will work. And when people try to go through this pretty quickly, then they sometimes make mistakes. The first option we have is noted as being optional, but it is to enter specific values. In this case, it's campus IDs. This is a filter. It looks a little different than the other filters we looked at because it's a free-form text box. But the reason that this is here is this is a public student directory. In many cases, users of this information will already have a list of students. If you work in you're the program coordinator for computer sciences, you may already know who your students are, and you may already have a list of campus IDs, in which case you can literally copy and paste a column from Excel of student campus IDs into that box, and then immediately export, and you'll be getting this directory information for those students. But in many, or maybe most cases, you don't already have a list of students, so this is an optional step. And if you skip it, then you'll just use the filters that come after to then whittle down to a specific population that you're interested in. So I don't have any campus IDs, and if this were HR data, it would be IMPL ID. If this were finance data, it would maybe be UDDS or some sort of financial transaction number. I don't have that, so I'm going to skip it. I'm not going to change. This is another filter type that we haven't seen before. It's radio buttons, and it's a single select. So you must select a term, and you can only select one term. We have the most recent term selected. I'm going to leave that. And then I come down to these additional selections, which are also optional because I could just export the entire public student directory. It's a large file, but I could do that. But I want to make optional selections, and when I come down here, you'll notice that there's actually already some selections made. So academic career is filtered to undergraduate, and academic plan, major, is filtered to comp sci, BA, BS, and BMaj, which is additional major. Why are these filters already selected? If you look down here at view, you'll see it says view, UGrad, comp sci. It's because this is a custom view that I set before the demo, and I set it as my default. So when I came to this workbook, it was already filtered to undergraduate computer sciences students because in this hypothetical, that's the population I care about, and I'm never going to be exporting data for anybody else because that's outside of my interest. If I didn't have a custom view and I was coming into the original view, then all of those filters would have been set to all. So now I've got these, my filters are set, I'm ready to go. Then I just follow the rest of the sequence, which you've already seen. Download, crosstab, download. Here's my file, and it opens in Excel. You may notice that this is not particularly readable or usable in the format that it exports. And that's because it is a raw text file that's unformatted. So there's no formatting when Excel opens it. And it's come to my attention that not everybody is an Excel whiz. So we're going to take a 5-minute detour out of Tableau into a demo of Excel because I just want to show you really quickly sort of the basic steps that I would take to treat this file to then make it something that's a lot more readable and usable. So the first thing that I would do is click this 1 to highlight the first row in Excel, which is going to be our headings, right? We see term, we see some things that we can't read. I'm going to add filters to this row, and I do that by coming up here and clicking Sort and Filter, and Filter. And now you'll see that there is a little drop-down caret on every one of our headings. So I've added filters to every column, and these filters work just the same way as our filters in Tableau did. So why would I want to add these? Because you'll notice that in our menu of selections of what to download, we had 3 choices. But then we get this huge range of information, and with some of these IDEs, there's a lot of data that comes with them. So it can be helpful to add these additional filters to further refine this information. So for instance, there is a field for withdrew indicator, and if I click that, I can see that some of the values are blank and some are yes, and I know from the documentation that if there's a yes in that field, it means that the student withdrew. And in this hypothetical, I'm looking for undergraduate computer sciences majors. I want to email them, and I don't want to email students that withdrew, so I'm going to uncheck yes, and all of the withdrawn students are filtered out, and it looks like 8 of them were removed. So it can be helpful to add these filters. The next thing that I would do is click this little triangle in the upper left of the data, which is going to select everything. And then I'm going to double-click the line between column A and column B. And that's going to auto-set the width of all of my columns. And now everything's a lot more readable. I can read my headings. It's just a better format. The other thing that I might do to the heading row, so if I click 1 again, would be to freeze this row. And I would do that by clicking View, Freeze Panes, and Freeze Top Row. And by doing that, now if I'm exploring this information and I'm scrolling down, my headings always stay at the top. The next thing that I want to do is get rid of the information that I don't care about because it's just clutter. So there's a couple of ways I might do that. One would be to hide columns. So I'm building an email list. All I want is preferred first name and email address. So I'm going to click column A and drag over, right-click, hide. I'm going to do that again for these columns. So now I have first name, preferred, and email, and then I have a bunch of mailing address information. I'm not going to hide that. I'm going to delete it because I know I'm never going to mail anything to anybody. So now I'm left with preferred first name and email. You can see that some email addresses are blank. That's because these students are in the data because they don't have a FERPA hold, but this particular student does have an email hold, so the email address is redacted. I want to get rid of those too. I added filters, so that's an easy thing to do. I just click on my filter and uncheck the blanks. And now I have a usable email list that I can use to populate a whisk list or do a mail merge or something like that. There's one more step that is absolutely critical that should be done before I save this file. And this is, to me, like maybe the worst limitation in using Tableau as this sort of tool, which is once we exported that CSV file, there's now no documentation about what it was that we exported. We just have an Excel file with a bunch of information. And I worry about what happens when I find this document in 9 months or in a year and a half. I think there are 3 possibilities. One is I can open it, look at it, and I remember exactly what I did, and that's great. Another possibility is I open it and I say, I have no idea what this is, and I delete it, and that's great. But the worst case scenario is I open it and I think I know what it is, but it's actually something different, and then I use it. And so to guard against that, and unfortunately this is something that's the responsibility of the user, is to save yourself from your future self by creating some documentation about what this is. And it's a really simple thing to do. We just have to be disciplined about doing it. What I recommend doing is in the very first cell, I just click in there, I right-click, and then I click Insert Comment. And I'm going to put IDE Export, Public, Student Directory, Comp Sci, BA, BS, BMage. And I probably also add a date just in case I modify this file later and it gets a new timestamp on it. Somebody asked, do you really need to go to that trouble, or can you just put some information in the name when you save it? That's certainly an option too, but I think we should err on the side of completeness, and I certainly could not have gotten all of that information into the file name. So now that I've added that comment, when I open this file again, as soon as I move my cursor over that first cell, my note to myself pops up, and I know exactly what this is, and there's no possibility of confusion. Okay, that's it for the IDEs. They're very simple things, but they're very powerful. We've talked about the Tableau workbooks and the different kinds, and we've demoed them, but what we haven't talked at all about is where you can find them. There are two places where you're going to be able to find the Tableau content. And as I go through this, I think you'll understand why there are two places instead of a single place, because they have comparative advantages. There's going to be a portal. It is yet to be named, yet to be branded. But it is under construction and is significantly, it's not theoretical, it really is under construction. And it's going to live at data.wisc.edu, which is the website for the Office of Data Management and Analytics Services. And then the other place where you can find Tableau workbooks is on the institutional Tableau server, which is at dataviz.wisc.edu. Why would you want to go to one or the other? The portal, which is under construction, which is going to be at data.wisc.edu, one reason to go there is that it is not going to be limited to Tableau content. It is going to be a one-stop shop for all of our analytical, business intelligence, data, reporting content, not just Tableau. So it'll include all sorts of other things, including written analytical reports, things like the Data Digest and Registrar's Enrollment Report. If we were to build things out in UW Systems implementation of OBI-EE in that suite of tools, that content would be here. So it's really the place to go to find all content, not just Tableau content. The other big benefit to the portal is that you're going to be able to see everything that's available, not just the things that you are already currently authorized to see. And that is different than the Tableau server. When you go to the Tableau server, you only see things that you are authorized to see, and you don't know what other content is out there that you might be interested in and might want to request access to. So why would you ever want to go to the Tableau server then if you've got this portal option? Well, one is that it already exists and is not under construction, so you can go to it now. But the other is that it has a customizable home page where you can add all of the Tableau content that is of interest to you to a single page, which makes it really easy to look at multiple workbooks in a certain in a specific session. Whereas with the portal, you'd have to kind of be clicking back and forth. Okay, so let's go out and look at the server. And I'm going to open a new incognito tab because I'm already logged in and I want you to see the login screen. So I go dataviz.wisc.edu and I'm immediately redirected to this NetID authentication page that all of us have seen before. And I'm only pausing here for a second to point out that there is going to be a switch sometime soon, probably this fiscal year, where we're going to be bringing other UWs on board, which is going to make a change here. When you go to dataviz.wisc.edu, at some point you will, instead of being taken to this page, you'll be taken to the UW System Federated Login Where Are You From page, which I'm sure most, if not all of you have seen before. It's a UW System page that'll have a drop-down that says Select Your Campus. You'll select UW-Madison and then be redirected to this NetID authentication page. Okay, so I log in, I authenticate, and I am successfully in the server. Unfortunately, this does not always happen for everybody all the time. And so I have to take another detour and tell you about a significant bug that we have that we're currently working on but have not ironed out yet. And so if it happens to you, you need to know how to deal with it. And it is the Tableau server sign-in loop glitch. And what will happen, if you ever encounter this, you will go to dataviz.wisc.edu, and instead of being taken to that NetID login authentication page, you're going to see this instead. It's going to say, unable to sign in, invalid username or password, try again. And then you're going to click try again, and it's going to say, you are signed out of Tableau server, sign in. And you're going to click sign in, and it's going to say, unable to sign in, invalid username or password. And you'll never be given the opportunity to enter your credentials. It's a weird glitch that's related to the way that your browser temporarily stores information about your sessions. And things get out of sync between your browser, Tableau server, and our campus authentication system. So it's something that as an institution we are working on resolving, but we just haven't resolved it yet. So I want to make sure people know what to do if this happens, because it can be frustrating. You're trying to get to some content. You have 3 options for dealing with this. And by the way, this is one of our KB pages, so we have documentation of this, and remember that if you remember nothing else. One option is to close your browser and open a new browsing session and then go to dataviz.wisc.edu, because this is going to clear that temporary information. I don't like that option personally, because I usually have like dozens of tabs open and I don't want to lose them. There are 2 other options. One is that you can open, if you're in Firefox, a new private window. If you're in Chrome, a new incognito window, as I just did. Or if you use Edge, it's an in private window. And if you do that, you have a new browsing session in that particular window. If you go to dataviz.wisc.edu, you will be able to authenticate as I just did. The third option is to open a new tab and log in to anything else that requires NetID authentication. So I know some people use MyUW for this. Those open a tab, click MyUW, authenticate. And then once you've re-authenticated, for some reason that resets all of the information, and then when you go to dataviz.wisc.edu, you just get in. So I hope that you don't encounter that glitch, but if you do, there are workarounds for it. Okay, back to the server. This is what the server looks like if you're browsing content on the server rather than accessing it through a link. Each of these tiles is a Tableau workbook. And you can see that they look like multi-page because they then have views and dashboards behind them. One consequence of having a consistent governed format for our Tableau workbooks is that everything kind of looks the same. And unfortunately with Tableau Server, you can't customize what the thumbnail shows. So it's always the first page. So the point of that is this is organized visually, but actually visually it's really hard to browse because everything kind of looks the same. So really to look at the content, what you want to do is use your filters and options over here on the left. There is a search bar which will search the title and the description. So if I search student, I now have 9 workbooks. I'm going to clear that filter. And you can see here it's telling me how many workbooks I have. So we just had 9. When I cleared the filter, I had 31. So I have 31 workbooks that I can see. There are more than 31 workbooks on the server. I don't know how many there are because I don't know what I can't see. So that's another plug for why you might want to use the portal. You will only see what you're authorized to see. Any of you who go here will see something because we do have workbooks that are either publicly available or are simply NetID authentication. So when you go there, you should see something, but different of you will see different workbooks in some cases. There are other things you can filter on rather than just searching. You can filter on the owner of the workbook, which in our case is the developer. You can filter on tags, though I don't recommend it because we haven't done anything institutionally in terms of deciding how we're using the tags or governing them. So there is content there, but it's sort of at the whim of individual developers, so it's not particularly useful. And then I also want to caution you about the modified on or after or modified on or before, because Tableau will log as a modification every time the workbook refreshes. And a workbook refresh does not necessarily mean anything changed in the workbook or in the data behind the workbook at all. We just set up our workbooks to refresh on a regular basis. So it may be misleading if you think that value is going to tell you when something actually changed in the workbook. That's actually not what it tells you. So if we find content that we want to look at here, this is the workbook that I was demoing earlier. When I click on the workbook, it then takes me to thumbnails of the various dashboards. If you're exploring a workbook for the first time, you should go to the home page so that you can get the description and see what the content is. But if you're returning, you may be interested in a specific dashboard. And this is the last thing I wanted to point out. Now that I'm looking at this content on the server, that menu that we were using before is now up here rather than being below the visual content. Okay, final important thing, actually, I told you that one of the benefits of going to the server is that you could customize the content that you see when you get to the server. So let me show you the way that you do that is you can favorite workbooks. So every workbook has a title and a view count, and then it has this little star. And if the star has no fill, then you have not favorited it. And if you click it, you will favorite it, and it will be then filled with orange. So you can see I have not favorited the Dean's List. I have favorited degrees and related data. And then there's a little checkbox here for only my favorites. If I click that checkbox, I'm now only seeing the workbooks that I told Tableau Server I want to see. And I can set this as my default page when I come to dataviz.wisc.edu by coming up here and clicking my name, and then clicking Make This My Start Page. So when I do that, then every time I come to dataviz.wisc.edu, this is my starting point, and I can, of course, uncheck only my favorites to look and see if there's any new content that I want to check out. Okay, I want to end by just pointing out a few resources. Some of this we've already talked about, but I wanted the links in here since this slide deck will be available, so you don't need to write down or remember any of these links. Office of Data Management Analytics Services website, data.wisc.edu. That's where this slide deck is going to be. That's where the video is going to be if you want to share that with any colleagues you think might benefit from this content. That's also where the portal will be in the future, and that's where you'll find a lot of news about things that are developing and happening in this area of analytics and reporting on campus. I then wanted to point out the Academic Planning and Institutional Research website, specifically the Tableau page, which is at apir.wisc.edu/Tableau. We've only been talking about how end users access and interact with Tableau content. I know that some of you probably have questions about the development of Tableau workbooks and accessing the server for publishing things. If you have questions about that, your starting point is this apir.wisc.edu/Tableau. That has an FAQ about how the licensing works, and who to contact and under what circumstances to try to get access to the institutional server to publish content. I then wanted to point out the knowledge base. The Tableau knowledge base is at kb.wisc.edu/MSN data. Of course, you'll also find all of our Tableau KB articles if you just go to the main UW-Madison KB page, kb.wisc.edu, and search Tableau. You'll get all the articles. And most of what we talked about here today is already up there or will be up there soon, including that sign-in loop glitch and including the quick reference documentation too. And then finally, this is the link to the server, dataviz.wisc.edu. With that, that's the end of my content, but I will open it up for questions. We have about 10 minutes. And I will also stick around at the end. If you have questions that are really individual or specific, you can come talk to me at the end. But if anybody has any general questions, now would be a good time for that. Okay. Oh, yes.
I noticed B-Mage was listed.
Yes.
Is that the same as the A-Mage?
Yes. I think now we're talking substance, but I think A-Mages have been converted to B-Mage for bachelor's level, M-Mage for master's level, and D-Mage for doctoral level. I think that's something that's in process. So another hand. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about getting access and getting training as trainings more?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I did when I showed sort of where this fits in with the overall scheme of sort of rolling out Tableau to campus. There will be some actual trainings, some hands-on training, and some subject matter specific, content specific trainings. We're in the planning stages of those. I'm not sure how many there'll be or how segmented they'll be, but those won't happen until after we've rolled out the content. And at this point, we haven't rolled out any of like the complete baskets of content. And then those trainings will happen on a rolling basis as the content comes out. So, for instance, we are farther along as an institution in converting student query library information to Tableau than we are converting HR query library information to Tableau. So you should expect that the student functional area trainings will happen before the HR functional area trainings. We will communicate with the whole campus as those things happen, in the same way we communicate about this session. But also, for those of you who actually use the query library, we know who you are and what queries you have access to and what you use. And so users of the query library will get contacted about the queries that they use and have access to as those queries have been delivered in the Tableau content. And there will be some grace period, some overlap, where the Tableau content will exist and the query library content will still exist before those specific queries actually get retired. Yes?
I hear you saying that it sounds like our query library access may have some process in place to get us access when it switches over to Tableau. But what about things like, I know there's an HR compliance thing in Tableau right now.
Yes.
But I'm not finding on the data.list how to sign up and get access to that, nor what to request because you can't see what you don't have access to.
Right, and that's why we're developing the portal, is to try to address that issue, and unfortunately we don't have really a good way of dealing with that right now. I guess what I can say is when you find out about content, like from a colleague that you don't have access to, I think right now the best way to handle that is to ask that person who the contact is on the workbook and contact them and ask for access. Okay, as you leave, please check your name on the sign-in sheets that are at the back on your way out, if you don't mind. And like I said, I'll stick around if there are any more questions.